encouragement or help, but you found yourself at a total loss for words? It's sometimes hard to know how to give our friends guidance, but it's even more challenging when we know our friends are in a really dark place. As a pastor, I find myself in this sort of situation all the time. Spaces where people are hurting or grieving, and sometimes I'm honestly not sure what to say. See, friends and strangers alike find themselves in extremely difficult life situations all the time. And a lot of those times, a sense of hopelessness comes with them. And we've all been there. I mean, just last week, Tanner detailed a time in his own life where he felt alone and almost totally out of hope. And the truth is that there are plenty of reasons that we find ourselves feeling hopeless. It might be when things aren't going our way, or we keep facing one disappointment after another, or something is wrong in our lives or in the world, like we discussed in our I Have Questions series, or maybe it's even a prayer we've been praying that still hasn't been answered. Of course, not everything that happens in our lives is really that big of a deal, and sometimes it is just kind of easy to move past it with a little time. But whether it is a big deal or not that's making us feel hopeless, there are a few things that are true. The first is we need someone. Whether you're helping someone find hope or you're searching for hope yourself, you weren't meant to do it alone. When we're feeling hopeless, disappointed, or lost, we need each other. And I mentioned Tanner a moment ago. Last week, he kicked off this series with a message that is kind of a lot of the foundation of what I'm going to say today. So if you missed it or you were unable to be here last week, check out our YouTube channel. You can just search PCC Students and you can find it there and catch up. And you'll want to do that because he talked a lot about this right here. But on top of this, we also need a light. When you're walking through a dark room at night, what do? You turn on a light so you don't bump into any more furniture. In the same way, when someone is feeling lost in hopelessness, they need someone to turn on a light and help them find their way. More on that in a moment. And it's normal to feel overwhelmed sometimes. But when someone we love gets stuck in a dark or hopeless place, they might need a little extra help finding their way back to the light again. And that idea brings us to a story in the Bible about a woman named Hannah who knew what it was like to feel hopeless. And as we read this story, keep in mind that this takes place in a very different time and culture where women in marriage were not viewed the same way they are today. And we're going to read a large portion of Hannah's story. I'm probably going to mess up a few names as I do, but regardless, stay with me because it's a good story. There once was a man who lived in Ramathaim. He was descended from the old Zoop family in Ephraim Hills. His name was Elkanah, and he had two wives. The first was Hannah, who we're going to talk about. The second was Peninnah. Peninnah had children. Hannah did not. Every year, this man went from his hometown up to Shiloh to worship and offer a sacrifice to the Lord. Eli and his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, served as the priest of God there. When Elkanah sacrificed, he passed helpings from the sacrificial meal around to his wife Peninnah and all her children. But he always gave an especially generous helping to Hannah because he loved her so much and because God had not given her children. But her rival wife taunted her cruelly, rubbing it in and never letting her forget that God had not given her children. And this went on year after year. And every time she, meaning Hannah, went to the sanctuary of God, she could expect to be taunted. Hannah was reduced to tears and had no appetite. Her husband, Elkanah, said, "Oh, Hannah, why are you crying? Why aren't you eating? And why are you so upset? Am I not of more worth to you than 10 sons? I feel you, man." But Hannah ate. Then she pulled herself together, slipped away quietly, and entered the sanctuary. The priest Eli was on duty at the entrance of God's temple in the customary seat. And crushed in soul, Hannah prayed to God and cried inconsolably. Then she made a vow. "Lord Almighty, if you'll take a good hard look at my pain, if you'll quit neglecting me and go into action for me by giving me a son, I'll give him completely, unreservedly to you. I'll set him apart for a life of holy discipline." It so happened that as she continued in prayer before God, Eli was watching her closely. Hannah was praying in her heart, silently. Maybe you've prayed this way before. Her lips moved, but no sound was heard. Eli jumped to the conclusion that she was drunk. He approached her and said, "You're drunk. How long do you plan to keep this up? Sober up, woman." Hannah said, "Oh no, sir, please. I'm a woman brokenhearted. I haven't been drinking. Not a drop of wine or beer. The only thing I've been pouring out is my heart, pouring it out to God. Don't for a minute think I'm a bad woman. It's because I'm so desperately unhappy and in such pain that I've stayed here for so long." Now, we don't exactly know what Hannah's family was celebrating when this encounter between her and Eli took place at the temple, but we know it would have normally been a time for singing, dancing, praising, worshiping, and feasting. It would have been basically a party. That is, for everyone except Hannah. Now, Hannah had a lot of reasons to feel hopeless. She desperately wanted children, but couldn't. Although her husband loved her, having children was seen as a very important function for women in the day. And if women couldn't have children, she wasn't really seen as valuable. Also, Hannah and her husband's second wife were rivals, which doesn't sound like a very easy or peaceful way to live. Because Peninnah was jealous of her husband's love for Hannah, she was cruel and bullied her. So after years and years of this happening, Hannah couldn't take it anymore. She wept. She couldn't eat. She felt desperate, anxious, grieved, and probably worthless. And to top all of it off, even Eli, who was a prophet of God, added to Hannah's pain when he accused her of being drunk in one of her most vulnerable and hopeless moments. But Eli eventually realizes his mistake, and watch what happens when he does. Eli answered her, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel give you what you have asked of him." "Think well of me and pray for me," she said, and went her way. Then she ate heartily, her face radiant. You see, Eli doesn't fall over himself apologizing for falsely accusing her. He doesn't make excuses for his behavior or even make the situation about himself. Instead, he was able to be what Hannah needed at this moment. He listened, and he offered a prayer for her. He wasn't her longtime friend. They probably hardly knew each other. They definitely weren't husband and wife, but he was someone who showed up in her dark moment. And while Eli couldn't fix Hannah's problem, he did what he could do. He saw her hopelessness and had compassion for her. He spoke with God on her behalf. He encouraged her and told her to have peace. It's almost like Eli was saying, "Hannah, let me be hopeful for you until you're ready to be hopeful again." And if you keep reading the story, which I hope you'll do, you'll see that that's exactly what happens. Hannah's hope does return to her, and God, after many anguished prayers and long nights for Hannah, finally answers the prayer the way she had hoped, and she has a son, Samuel. It just so happens that the book we read Hannah's story in is named after her son. But that's a different story for a different day. And the conclusion of this story is heartwarming for Hannah, and it makes us feel good when we hear it. But despite this account of a woman getting exactly what she wanted in the Bible, it's there, sometimes it's hard for us to believe. After all, we know that not every prayer of ours gets answered the way we want it to, just like I mentioned before. So in those scenarios, for us, what are we supposed to do? When a friend is feeling hopeless, how do we give them hope? Do we promise God's going to make all their dreams come true, that he's going to answer their prayers exactly the way he answered Hannah's? No, absolutely not. Please don't do that. But there are things we can do. Because if you think a friend might be feeling hopeless, start by paying attention. Is your friend acting differently than they usually do? Are they quieter or more distant? Are they hanging out with friends or returning your messages less than they normally do? Do they seem angrier or maybe even meaner than they normally are? Sometimes these can be signs that a friend isn't doing well. Once you've paid attention, then you should ask and listen. Ask how they're doing and really listen to their response. What's going on? Are they experiencing something difficult right now? How are they feeling? What do they need? Practice offering a safe space free of judgment. If they speak negatively about themselves, others, or even God, just try and be as patient and as graceful with them as you can be. And after that, do your best to emphasize and to feel with them. What I mean by this is whether they're feeling angry or sad or frustrated or desperate, try and put yourself in their shoes. Try and feel those things with them. Don't minimize their feelings by saying things like, it'll be fine, or it's not that bad, or other things that we tend to say to blow it off. Instead, let them know it's okay to feel however they're feeling and that you'll do your best to understand. And once we've done these first few things one time, our friends might feel a little better knowing that you care about them, but over time, that feeling will go away if we don't regularly check in with them. So, be consistent. If they're having a hard time, check in with them at least once a week so they know that you care. Show them with your words, your actions, and presence that you are there for them. And on top of this, it's critical that you pray for them. Pray with your friend so that they're not alone, and pray for them even when you're not around. I'm particularly passionate about this one because any chance you can take to invoke the literal power of the God of the universe by asking him directly to intervene, you need to, and you'd be kind of foolish not to. So pray for them. But even considering all this, sometimes hopelessness is more than just a passing feeling of disappointment or frustration. And in some cases, your friend might need encouragement to get help when they need it. If you're worried your friend is dealing with anxiety or depression or another mental health crisis, talk to an adult you trust right away, and we're going to do everything we can within our power to help. And lastly, take care of yourself. Share with a trusted adult how it feels to care for your friend, but just like your friend needs hope, you need people to help you stay hopeful too. And look, before you get overwhelmed by the 7 or 8 things I just mentioned, let me put your mind at ease a little bit. You'll never be able to fix everyone's problems for them, and there are some times where a friend will need help that you're not qualified to give. That's true for me too. Every one of us has our roles to play, and that's how it should be. I think it's potent that the only thing Eli says in the story is just a short prayer, and yet it made such a difference in Hannah's life. It's a good example for us. That was his lane. We all have our own lanes. But regardless of what your role might be, there is one thing you can always do. When you think someone might be feeling hopeless, you can let the hope you found in Jesus overflow from you to them. And just like Eli did for Hannah, you have the ability to help others find hope when they're feeling hopeless through your presence and your prayers. When you show up, your friend will be reminded that hope can still exist, even when they can't see it or feel it. By being with them in their hopelessness, you can hold on to hope when they're unable to. And through your prayers, you have the privilege of helping your friend carry the burden and the weight of their loneliness. You get to ask God to hear their prayer and give them hope again. Now, there are a lot of reasons to think the world is dark or scary, but we can help our friends see the light in the darkness. Because of our hope in Jesus, we can shine for others when they've lost their way. And when we ourselves start to feel lonely or afraid or hopeless, we can look to one another so that they can point us back to Jesus too. In big ways and small ways. There are a lot of hurting people around us all the time. But don't let that be the reason for you to lose hope. Instead, Let it be an invitation to show people how much God loves them by showing them how much you love them. You can be a light in the darkness when you choose to be with people when they're grieving, when they're lonely, when they're in need, and when they need hope.